Okay. Okay. All right. Hey, guys. How's it going? Sorry for the technical difficulties there. I stopped the broadcast. Couldn't figure out how to start it, but whatever. We'll work it out. Welcome to the live stream right now. Looks like we only have 5 viewers. So I'll introduce for a second, and hopefully everybody gets the updated link. Okay. So then we'll get started with the questions here in a second. We're down to 1 viewer. Up to 3 viewers. If you can hear that in the background, that's my daughter playing video games. Want to say hi, Sienna?
What?
Gonna say hi to the kids?
Okay.
Say hi.
Hi.
Want to come over here and say hi? Okay, look into the mirror and say hi. Okay, all right. Read it. Check the thing. Okay, cool. Awesome. So let's see here. Let's get it going. 5 viewers. Give it another 10 seconds here, and then we'll start up. Let's see. A couple test tips while there's only a couple of you here. Make sure you guys read the questions really, really careful, and make sure you understand what it's asking you, because a lot of the times the question is going to ask you not in plain English, like, hey, what happened before? But that's what they're trying to ask. Like, hey, what caused this event to happen? What happened before leading up to it? What allowed the event to happen? I know in one of the classes today I talked about that already, but maybe not the other one. Other phrasing is like, what was the effect? What effect did the above document have? If the above document's about the Columbian Exchange, then what effect does that have on Europe? Like, you can talk about the price revolution, about how it promotes population growth through adding more staple crops, and that eventually will lead to inflation and a bad economy. Other things that results of that would be the shifting power from an economic power from the Mediterranean during the Renaissance to the Atlantic states of Spain and Portugal, then eventually England, Netherlands, and France. So again, make sure you understand, is the question asking you something that caused it, or something that happened as a result of it, or did the question ask you, like, how did they do this? So again, exploration, how did they do that? They did it through the support of kings and queens. Hey, Pop, I can't have you do that. Can you get over there? Kings and queens, or they did it through the use of technology that are in the concept, or maybe through like the guns, germs, and steel thing that we talked about with Jared Diamond. All right, so let's get to the questions real quickly, and we'll start going. All right, 1.4.3a, what was the name of the commercial network along the African coast? The commercial network, I'm not sure if it had a name for the network. It was controlled by the Portuguese at the beginning. Again, it's the old imperialism where they're just doing it primarily, not 100%, but primarily for economic gain, and to try and set up trading posts all the way around the Cape of Good Hope, all the way to the Spice Islands. But if it had a name, I'm not very certain what it was. Okay, did the Portuguese or any other group attempt to stop the Spanish from establishing these colonies? Good question. Yeah, so this is actually a really good question. So one of the concepts talks about rivalries between these companies and or countries that started because of, hey, baby, come on, man. Can't hear. Because of their butting into each other in search of these colonies to try to get a little bit more wealthier and more powerful and more prestigious. So one of the major rivalries that occur are from the Portuguese and the Spanish. They are both vying to control large parts of land in the New World after Spain had already landed. Christopher Columbus did his thing. Because they were having tensions between them, the Pope steps in. They're both Catholic countries, and the Pope doesn't like the fact that these guys are going to start, having a war with each other. There's already enough problems going on with Catholicism. So he brokers a deal. It's called the Treaty of Tordesillas. That deal gives the Portuguese all the land east of a line of longitude. Don't know what the number is. You can probably look it up. And everything to the west of it goes to Spain. It just so happens that present day Brazil is about where that line is. And so the Portuguese get that land, which is primarily Brazil and up the coast, while the Spanish get the rest of the land. Obviously, the Spanish win. They get way more land out of this. But today, if you go to Brazil, they speak Portuguese, and it's because of this deal that was brokered, the Treaty of Tordesillas. The other ones that you guys are going to run to really aren't going to be talked about with this test. We'll talk about the Dutch-Anglo Wars are going to happen in the next unit. That's where the English basically ally with the French through the Treaty of Dover, and they both gang up on the Dutch. The primary reason is France wants to expand its empire on the continent towards the Rhine River and up into the Dutch Republic. And England wants to take over all of their trade and become the dominant sea power. Spoiler alert, they will do that. And that's when England becomes the most powerful and wealthy country on the seas. Some French and Indian War is another one. Again, that will probably be next unit or the unit after that. That's the French versus the British. The French are setting up trading posts in North America out of Quebec down into the Mississippi River and all the way down into what we call New Orleans today. And they're fur traders, and those guys will have a war over the land. So it's going to happen all over the world, but those are the 3 or 4 primarily examples of that concept. For this test, though, Portugal, Spain, Treaty of Tordesillas. Okay, let's see. Social I'm going to pass that one. That's probably a little bit, social dislocation, guys, is probably one that's going to be a little bit, I would have to kind of delve into that a little bit more than I'm going to have time for today. I don't think you will need that for this particular test. That's going to kind of come up on the next test. It has to do with the concept that's coming up. I know it was a term on there, but it's a term because it's actually in one of the concepts, but it's some of these concepts aren't really for this test. They're for the next test. So I will pass that till next test. Refresher on Spanish imperialism and old imperialism. Okay, I kind of just talked a little bit about it, but I'll go through it again one more time. The old imperialism of this time period is primarily going to be characterized by countries going out for economic motives as their #1 motive and setting up trading companies and setting up trading posts along the coastal parts of the world, whether that's Africa, over towards the Spice Islands and India, and these other islands that are through there. And it's primarily done for economic gain and to exploit those countries. Most of the reasons they're going to do this is not for political power in terms of trying to expand their empire. They're going to do it for economic reasons. While the Spanish are actually going in, taking over the land, they are going to be the governors of the land. They're going to officiate the land. They're going to set up their laws in the land. And they are trying to politically dominate them, socially dominate them, culturally dominate them, and economically dominate them. So it's a far more reaching, what Spain is doing is far more reaching than what Portugal will do, the Dutch will do, and even the English to a point. I mean, the English will go into North America and kind of do what Spain does. But for the most part, those other countries are doing it for economic reasons. When you get to the 19th century, you're going to talk about imperialism again, and what the questions you will see would be compare old imperialism with new imperialism, and the new imperialism will be kind of the idea that these European countries actually go down and replace local governments a lot of the times. They try to turn the people into little Frenchmen, speaking French, going to French schools, and they're actually trying to expand the land that they conquer. And yeah, it's for economic gain, but it's a lot of political gain as well. Let's not worry about that question right here. I'm going to pass that one up. That's not much I know about that. Okay, 1.4.1a. What does the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company do? What do they do? They're trading companies. They set up forts, and they set up trading posts in which the locals can come and trade with the Dutch or the English there, and they can use it as a base of operations to economically dominate and be able to bring back those goods to Europe in order to sell and make a profit. Those companies were chartered by the government. So like the Dutch East India Company basically was granted a monopoly in Southeast Asia, Southern Asia, and through the Spice Islands and through those through those other islands in order to get wealthy, and they would give the king or the queen or whoever was in charge a cut of the profits for that. So that's kind of what they did. We just talked about the Treaty of Tordesillas. So Osama, if you just showed up, we rewatched the first 8 minutes or 9 minutes. I talked about that there. Little Ice Age was a time period in which the weather turned really bad. The winters were colder and more harsh, and the winters went on for longer periods of time. So normally when you are growing food, you start to plant in the springtime, whatever that might be, whatever latitude you're at. So let's just say April. As it starts to get warm, the snow melts and you can start to plant your crop, and it'll grow throughout the summer, and then in the fall you're going to harvest it. Well, if you normally have 4 or 5 months to plant it, grow it, and harvest it, and the winter turns cold and the winter turns longer, now you might only have 3 months to do that. So by shortening the growing season, it's going to cause a super massive shortage in food, in grains, in staple foods that these people would eat. The Little Ice Age is going to come up more when in the next 2 units, when we talk a little bit more about the French Revolution. I think it's not the next one, but the next one, because it's 17th century into the 18th century that the Little Ice Age happens. But once that passes, it's kind of a brief period as well. Once that passes, things will go back to normal. Food production will go back to normal, and populations will start to replenish themselves because of the longer growing seasons. What was Calvin's Geneva? So Calvin's Geneva, I don't remember the concept. If you would type up the concept for me, I would be able to answer that easier, but I'll just tell you what Calvin's Geneva is. Calvin's Geneva is it's an example of a church putting kind of down the hammer on society in terms of its morals, its norms, and what they do. Most everything in Calvin's Geneva was, remember from the Protestant Reformation, the government was actually run by the church officials in Geneva under Calvinism. So the laws were all Bible-related laws, 10 Commandment laws. And if you broke those laws, not only did you break God's laws, but you broke the civil laws. You could be punished harshly. You'd be whipped, perhaps, maybe put in stocks. If you broke those laws enough, you'd actually be excommunicated and kicked out of Geneva as being a poor moral character. So I don't remember the concept, but that's what Calvin's Geneva is. Freehold tenure. We talked about this, I think, in both classes today, guys. The freehold tenure, the freeholders. We talked about the yeomanry. We talked about the idea that in the West, serfdom is starting to wane. With this new economic expansion due to overseas trade, there are more opportunities for people to work. There are more opportunities for wealth. And the serfdom is being replaced by people who are working poor peasants, but yet they're free though. But they're not tied to the land legally, if you will. And these freeholders, in some cases, are actually able to save up some money and buy a small piece of land, because of, like in England, with like the enclosure movement we talked about today. And over generations and generations, maybe that family would get to the point where they owned acres and acres of land. This happens in U.S. history as well. So you guys will talk a little bit about this after the Civil War in the South, that free black slaves will be able to start buying land. They kind of turn into sharecroppers, but still, nonetheless, still a free person. Let's see. I think that covers the freehold tenure. Importance of the Bank of Amsterdam. Yeah, Bank of Amsterdam is an institution created by the Dutch Republic, in which it's large enough, powerful enough, and wealthy enough to loan people money. How they make their money is off the interest. We talked about the idea of usury or whatever, paying interest rate on loaned money. But up until this point, we talked about the Fuggers, and we talked about the Medicis, how they were really wealthy banking families, and they were actually borrowing these people money to do things. And at some point, the ventures become so enormously costly that even those families have a hard time being able to loan that type of money out to all the people who want it. So these national banks are created, and they have the means, and they have the backing to be able to borrow people large amounts of money, whether it's to create a company that wants to go explore, buy boats for trading, buy land perhaps for farming. So it's just one example of a national bank. Another national bank will be the Bank of England. Credit Mobilier, I believe, is the Bank of France that will be set up in the 1700s, 18th century. So it's just one good example of that. Further explanation, the African slave trade. I think really what you just need to know is like the primary cause of it. I mean, the cause is when the Spanish go over and they set up the plantation system, and that's like the encomienda system, where the indigenous population was forced to work on these for multiple days a week. When the Spanish came over, because of the disease that was wrought on them, because of the forced labor situation, the exploitation, many of them died. I don't know, the book said 80–90% of them die. The plantation economy was set up in such a way that they needed labor. And so once the indigenous people were no longer available to work because they died, then they started to import slaves from Africa. So the main cause, I mean, had the indigenous people not died, and had there been plenty of them to work in the plantation economy, slavery probably wouldn't have happened the way it did at all, because they were just basically needed bodies to work the fields in order for the Spaniards to make a profit. And then eventually that same thing happens in the southern part of the United States with cotton. I think I talked about the idea that cotton and sugarcane are and tobacco, super labor intensive things you have to do. It's like a lot of work just to get a small amount of profit. So again, you can't be paying people to do that type of stuff anyway, because it would make those products so expensive that nobody would be able to buy them. So I hope that answers the question. Quick question. So concepts such as 1.5 and onwards are for the next test. Ooh, I don't know. I don't really have the ones in front of me, so I could take a minute to look them up. 1.5 population. Nope, 1.53A I could see being on the test. 1.51A I could see being on the test. Rural household units, 1.54A might be on the test. Price revolution, 1.52B definitely on the test. Western 1.5, yeah, no. Socialist weakening religious institution reformation. No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I don't know that all of them are, but definitely enough of them on that list are you should know. And again, remember, guys, we can't, I mean, I've had a few of you guys come up and go, hey, can you give us more of a hint what's on the test? No, I can't, because that's not preparing you for the test at all. I mean, you're going to have, I mean, how many concepts per unit have we had? We're looking at about 10 to 15 concepts, and there's about 26 units. So if you do the math, it's a couple hundred concepts you're going to have to know. They're only going to ask you 40, 50 concepts out of all of those. So we don't know which ones they're going to ask us. They don't tell me, hey, we're going to focus on women's rights this year, or hey, pay attention to the French Revolution. So we kind of have to mock the test. You have to be prepared for that. And furthermore, if you don't study them all, you're just going to keep falling further and further and further behind. So again, remember, do your work. You're AP students. Moving on, importance of guilds, and who were some people that would challenge the guilds? Okay, good question. The guilds were kind of similar to what we would call a trade union today, although they're not unions. They were a group of skilled workers, whether they be blacksmiths or textile workers, who would band together. They would create like a brotherhood, and they would all agree that they would only work for a certain wage. This would be, in my example, I'm always saying $20 an hour. Well, obviously that's not for back then, but they would only work for a certain wage. This circumvents the capitalist system. Capitalism is that competition. If you have different groups of people competing to work for you, you can drive the wage down. If I've got 10 people who want to work, I got 10 jobs available for you, but I have 100 people who want to work. I could probably move from $10 an hour down to $7 an hour just because so many people want to work. So this sets a false price on things. And if you are a merchant, your primary goal is to make as much profit as you can from your goods. And the guild system doesn't allow you to do that. So the people who would challenge the guild system from a profit stance would be the merchants in the towns, the rural merchant, or excuse me, the urban merchants would challenge them. And their accessories to this challenge would be the rural poor. Remember the people we talked about after enclosure, they got kicked off the land, and these guys need jobs. And so when the textile, a merchant who sells textiles, which are cotton goods, they'll go to the countryside and they'll find people. Hey, you guys work? Yeah, we'll work. All I need you to do is sew these things together. Well, can you do it? Yeah, we can do it. Well, how much will you work for? $5 an hour? And they're like, yeah, of course we'll work $5 an hour. We don't have a job. So of course we will. And so now the merchant can pay a lower wage for that, which is going to get him more profit in his pocket, which he can build his business. Eventually, as the Industrial Revolution really kicks off, these wealthy merchants will start building big, huge factories in towns, in cities. And instead of going to the rural side, which is called the putting out system or the cottage industry, the poor rural peasants will move to the city. And when they move to the city, because that's where the jobs are, then we'll get to all the problems that faces. You already talked in some of the concepts about the crime that was happening in cities, the rise in crime because of the population kept shooting up. And, during the 1700s, there wasn't even a police. They didn't have like policemen. There was no such thing as those. They didn't have a police force. So that is the guilds. What are town elites? Town elites, again, are just going to be these merchants that we're talking about. What is a field rotation? Field rotation guys are just town elites are just these wealthy land factory or business owners, if you will. Field rotation. They talked about the three. What was it? The 3 field rotation and the 2 field rotation. One is in the north, one's in the south. It's just a practice of leaving a piece of land fallow. Fallow is unused so that it can replenish, the soil can replenish itself. When you are farming and you keep using the same soil over and over and over, and you can't replenish the chemicals, the nitrogens or whatever is going into the soil, that soil will eventually, all the nutrients will be sucked out of it and become dead. It's just a way to keep always having a fertile piece of land is primarily what it is. Okay, let's go to the next one. All right, here we go. Whoops, sorry, wrong one. Where are we at? There we are. What was, I don't know what that is. Sorry, guys. So let's see.
What's 5 minus 2? Choose one. 5 minus 2.
Okay, let's move on. So this one, Charivari, that is some sort of ritual or something, as I recall, something to do with marriage or or a super loud, noisy event that happens. I don't know if it's like a ritual inside, but I know that it might be associated with the marriage. I don't really remember that word so much, but you can look it up online, but I think I'm pretty close to that. I don't even remember seeing this word, guys. So let me check it out. Command B. Let me see this. Vocab, flashcards. Charts made by medieval navigators. Good, awesome. It's just a, sorry, where are we at? Okay, just an example of technology that explorers would use to help them find new land. Remember prior to discovery of these technologies like the astrolabe and the compass and the better map making and all these other tools, ships like the Portuguese at the beginning would never sail away from the coast. So basically they would sail all day, but they would track the coast the whole time, because if they ever lost sight of the coast, they run the risk of becoming lost, disoriented, and basically dying. So ships would never, ever leave the coast as they were going. Anytime they wanted to explore, you always had to see land. But these new technologies allow ships now to go out into the open seas. You don't need a landmark to tell you where you are or where you're going. You're traveling by these instruments, these new technologies that were being made. And this is just one example of those new technologies that was being made that allowed these explorers to go into open water. Refresher: subsistence farming, guys, is just farming to feed yourself. Most poor farmers during this period don't have land. They have small little plots of gardens where they're literally growing food so that they don't starve to death. So subsistence agriculture is farming to feed yourself, which is the opposite of commercial farming, in which a company or family will grow crops, cash crops, to sell for profit. So those are the two sides of the farming. You're either a commercial farmer or a subsistence farmer. What were the family banking houses? Those were the Fuggers and the Medicis that we talked about already in class. So these families ended up gaining substantial amounts of wealth through loaning individuals, even kings, money, and in return they were getting paid back with interest. So that's how they got wealthy, and those are two good examples. Like the Fuggers are in Germany and the Medicis are in Italy. Cool. All right. Any other questions? Jed, let me know if we're good. I'll check something out.
Mine's gonna be a hard one. 14 minus 5. Can you count along from 14?
Yeah, guys, I mean, I'm just looking at the test. We covered most of it. There's a lot of stuff on there. 1.5.3c, what was abolishing on restricting abolishing on restricting carnival? Was that a concept? 1.5, what was it? 1.5.3. 1.5.3. Oh, or not and, or restricting carnival. Yeah, so so as the Reformation is taking place, a couple things are going to happen. An example of the religious authorities tightening down on social norms and controlling the society would be Calvin in Geneva. The opposite of that is happening in many of the places. In many of the places, the church is losing its power. Again, it's crazy, but they don't lose their power. They're still super powerful even today, but they've been knocked down just a little bit. So in some cases, the city governments that were secular were left to kind of pick up the pieces for stuff that the Catholics had done before. And one thing that they might do would be to abolish or restrict Carnival, which was a big festival that they would have. I don't remember if it was at the harvesting or something of it had to do something with the growing season. And they would do that because in these times, people would, most of the time when they're having a big party or they're having a big communal get together, which was the norm back in the day, they would get pretty hammered up. I mean, frankly, the people would get really drunk, release themselves, party, break stuff, act the fool, because for 99% of their lives, they were locked in a box. You're a serf. This is what you do every day. I mean, just get up, press repeat, press repeat, press repeat. It's kind of like you guys as students, right? Every day you got to wake up on Monday. You got to go to school. You got to do your homework. You got to go to sports and repeat and repeat and repeat. That's all these people did for 99% of their lives. The 4 or 5 or 6 days a year that they got to get let out of the box, they would get super crazy and bad things would happen. So governments started to abolish some of these different carnivals. They started to replace them with different activities. Eventually, that will lead to maybe there being less drunkenness, less hoodlumry, less violence, and less overall civil disobedience. That's kind of what it is. Hope that helps. What's the Pope's position during the eggs? The Pope is the Pope. He's the leader of the Catholic Church. Is what the Pope is. He hasn't really lost. I mean, the power that he's lost is because there are more followers that are, I mean, he's lost followers. I mean, even today, the 1.9 billion people in the world are Catholics. So that's nearly 25%, almost 28% of the world's population. So even though there are Protestants around, the Pope still holds a lot of sway over a lot of people. 1.5.3b, what were the sanitation problems? Yeah, so good question. This will definitely be coming up more specifically with the Industrial Revolution, but just think about it. So you've got a city, a town that was created for 1,000 people. They start to build some factories or some bigger places where they can produce goods, and you have this mass influx of people. Now you've got 2,000, 3,000 people trying to cram into a town that was created for 1,000 people. There's not enough housing. So what do? People start putting up, seriously, like shacks. They start, sleeping on the streets. They're making houses that are obviously probably not very well made. These houses don't have plumbing. They don't have running water because they were never created in the first place. They were kind of just put up on, as a temporary shelter. And so where are these people going to the bathroom? What are they doing when they are trying to cook their food? What are they doing after they cook the food with the coal? What are they doing? How are they washing their clothes? So you can think about all the crap that must have been going through the streets during this time period when you don't have running water in these places, and it probably pretty bad. So that would be a health and sanitation problem. So sewage, overpopulation, people living together in close quarters. Now you're exposed to the elements, you're getting sick, so your sicknesses are passing on to each other. So there was probably a lot more sickness going around in these places. If you're following at all what's going on in San Diego today with the homeless, there was a hepatitis A breakout, and all these homeless people were all shacked up together, living super close to each other, and this hepatitis kind of just got rampant right through there and spread really bad through the homeless population. Very similar thing that would happen back then. Professional double entry bookkeeping. You don't need really. I wouldn't really worry too much about it. It's just a technique or a method that was used by shopkeepers and merchants to tabulate profits and losses. And anytime that you're more accurate, you have more accurate accounting for your business, you have the opportunity to see perhaps where your business is falling short and where it's doing really well, and focus more attention on where it's doing well and maybe fix the problem. So it's just an accounting technique. I don't think you need to know any more than that. All right, guys. Anything else, Jeb? I'm gonna go to bed. Give it about another 30 seconds or a minute. If you have any other questions about the test, about test taking strategies, or anything like that, feel free to ask. I think that's it. All righty, sounds good. All right, guys, so that will be it for tonight. I hope that was as beneficial as last time. We'll talk about it after the test on Tuesday and on Wednesday. Fifth period, pass this on to fifth period tomorrow. Guys, get there as soon as you can because we're probably going to move classes to take the test in a different class, but we'll meet at my class. All right, guys, have a good night, and we will talk to you tomorrow. Cool. All right. Thanks, Jeff.